Alan Wake 2 is a trip. It's one of those experiences you can only really have in a game once, and if you truly want to experience Alan Wake 2 to the full effect, I'd recommend stopping this video now and playing it for yourself. There's just no way for me to talk about it without giving away some of the bits that kept me glued to this very weird and wild ride. With that being said, I'm gonna do my best to keep anything too major from being spoiled, but again, this game is best experienced without knowing really anything about it. Alan Wake 2 was a $50 game. The price point is something that's definitely worth noting. Some games still linger and release at $60, but a lot have switched over to the $70 price tag. I finished Alan Wake 2 in about 15 hours, so in my book, especially when it comes to modern gaming, you're getting some bang for your buck in this survival horror thriller. The game had its ups and downs for me, a pretty rocky start, but I wound up very invested in the madness of Alan Wake 2. If you enjoyed the video, remember to like, comment, and subscribe, and hit the notification bell to be notified of future uploads. I just kind of want to talk about my thoughts on Alan Wake 2. I don't entirely know how, but I'm going to give it my best shot. This video is going to be all over the place, much like the game itself, so let's just get the opening hours of the game out of the way. I really did not like the snail's pace of Alan Wake 2's first few chapters. I'm all for a slow burn, but in a video game, I think there needs to be a bit more oomph than what we got in the start. Some may very much be okay with it, but I was hitting a point where I wasn't sure it was ever going to pick up. I'll preface this by saying I played the original all the way back on release, and the original Alan Wake was a pretty forgettable experience for me, but I was very much down and interested in giving the sequel a shot. I never played Control, but I did play the original Max Payne many years ago. I'm just mentioning that to say I'm not very familiar with the Remedy universe, but I was still able to get into Alan Wake 2 and follow it with my very limited exposure to the universe. It can be played on its own, but I'm sure you're missing out on some context here and there. Back to the topic at hand. The game starts up and you're kind of just thrown in. Immediately questions are raised, and if you're anything like me, you'll be very intrigued. It's very much a crime thriller with an uncomfortable atmosphere, and I happen to love those kinds of stories. You're not playing as the titular character from the jump. Instead, you get to play as Saga Anderson, an FBI agent. The characters in Alan Wake 2, pretty much all of them are memorable. They're interesting, and honestly, it's what carried me through the opening bits, even when I was getting bored. Anyways, you're investigating some murders, and one happens right as you're arriving. You get introduced to a pretty wide array of what you can expect while playing Alan Wake 2 in these opening chapters, but it's not everything. It's also the first real problem I have with the actual gameplay. When you're doing your investigation, you're collecting evidence, and with that evidence, you have to answer questions with said evidence on a case board. Normally, I would like that there was a gameplay element to the mystery. I think it's cool and great that they wanted to make the player feel involved more directly in cracking the case. Unfortunately, it doesn't really work for me. You can read a piece of evidence and then find what question that piece of evidence might answer, or you can do it like I started doing around the halfway point of the game and just spam everywhere until it clicks. There's no fail state, you can't get it wrong, unless listening to Saga groan over and over sends you over the edge. Using the case board just turns into busy work. You're not really doing anything, it just feels like the game is trying to force feed it down your throat so you understand what's going on. It's only made worse by the amount of time you can spend just sitting in menus doing this. Once you get further into Alan Wake 2, you'll open multiple cases that all have individual sets of evidence, and you'll be swapping back and forth to blast your load of evidence all over. It's too much, and it's too constant for my tastes. Constantly stopping to open up the case board and throw evidence into the right spot was so tedious, and the more I got, the more I groaned. I think less would have been more in this case. One case, with the potential to make mistakes and change up the story, would have been far more interesting than the mess of organizing through a bunch of meaningless little details. Evidence could have been something you actually had to explore to find, and I think that would have suited Alan Wake 2 far better. When you actually get control of Alan, there's a similar menu, but this time it's a plot board, and it actually has some mechanical significance. You'll find echoes throughout the world. They're effectively audio logs with some silhouettes that play out in front of you. Some of these echoes will inspire Alan, and you can change the world around you by going to the plot board and swapping scenes. The whole multiple worlds, swap between them thing is pretty overdone these days, but it works here, and it's not as messy as the case board is. It feels very purposeful, and you aren't crammed in a menu for very long. Just to be clear, I'm not asking for this game to be non-stop action, but if I'm going to be in menus for a while to solve a case, I want it to be more engaging than the case board was. How about some good stuff? The visuals in Alan Wake 2 are really cool. Not only is this game just pretty to look at, but the atmosphere in general is impressive. It feels oppressive, it feels uncomfortable. There are long stretches where you can feel tense from the environment alone, waiting for something to happen, and nothing. It's hard to get this right, but Alan Wake 2 absolutely delivers. When walking around and exploring an environment becomes a mind game, especially for survival horror, you've done it right. There are plenty of trippy visual effects in the game as well, and it feels like a fever dream, much to the game's benefit. The characters in the game are very expressive, and the world has a sense of verisimilitude. People you talk to don't just stand there or awkwardly go through a few cycled animations. Everything is very deliberate. There are also live-action cutscenes that give another layer to an already impressive presentation. It really is an experience for better or worse, depending on your particular tastes. That does segue into a bit of an issue I had because of this. Remedy wanted to tell a story here, and sometimes they wanted to tell it a little too much for my tastes. Not only are you being pulled into the mind place or writer's room to do menu stuff, but you're also starting and stopping a ton in the actual world. Whether that be to watch an echo as Alan, or going into more menus to listen to pages of the manuscript, or profiling someone, which is yet again another cutscene. There are also scenes where you have to just stop, even if you're in control of the character, to watch something on a TV screen or something similar. There's just a lot in Alan Wake 2 that you watch instead of playing. Again, I don't need non-stop action, but I think the game is bordering on too much of this stuff, and it may even be right over that line for me. When you're not in cutscenes or fumbling around through the menus, the gameplay is actually pretty good. It's a very typical survival horror game. It's got the third-person over-the-shoulder shooting we've grown accustomed to, plenty of resource management, and bursts of frantic action that were a bit more exciting than I was expecting. Controlling both characters feels good on a very basic movement level, and there's even a dodge. Running around and exploring is very much rewarded, as it should be in a survival horror game. Plenty of collectibles and resources to find scattered around, plenty of lockboxes to find a code or key for, and the atmosphere always makes it feel like something could come out and get you at any moment. I like this part of the game a lot. Whether that be running through the forest of Bright Falls, Washington as Saga, or moving through a dark and twisted New York City as Alan. Alan Wake 2 actually has resource management, which was very nice. I still wound up having a decent amount of items near the end, but far less than I do in most other survival horror titles. You can't just spam stuff comfortably. Picking and choosing is necessary and very welcome. The combat itself is simple but effective. The only real difference to most other games of this sort is the flashlight. Using the flashlight to stun and make enemies vulnerable is a huge part of the combat loop. Batteries are an incredibly valuable resource, and you always want to make sure you have them on hand. After that, it's your typical third-person survival horror shooter. There are plenty of weapons to use throughout the game, like a handgun or revolver depending on the character, double-barrel shotgun, even a crossbow. Not only that, but there are other tools you can use like flares or flash grenades. It's easy to get overwhelmed by multiple attackers where you have to move around and pick them off effectively. It can be fun and intense. When you're in the thick of things, when the game has you in control and you're just exploring or find yourself in a fight, Alan Wake 2 really shines. I wish the game was a bit more evenly paced, because it definitely picks up after the first few hours, and I can imagine some dropping it before it ever really finds its stride. I think patience pays in Alan Wake 2, but I can also see the argument that it's the developer's job to keep you engaged. Fair point, and I'd be inclined to agree. The story is a wild ride. I saved it for last because I can't describe it well enough in just a few words, so bear with me, I'm going to try my best. It's a crime thriller. It's got weird trippy stuff that you just have to see to believe. There's a murder cult. There's some genuinely funny stuff. Some of the random shit that Take and say reminded me of the Deadites from Evil Dead, and I love that. It's just crazy. I happen to be a big fan of stuff like this, so Alan Wake 2 is a treat for me in the story department. I never got bored of the story itself, I got bored of the way it was told sometimes. It would lose me when I was just standing around or in menus, but the next major moment would pull me right back in. It's an experience that very few games could pull off, but Alan Wake 2 manages to get away with it. I love the nonsense. Twists and turns along the way, and just a general anything can happen feeling throughout was my cup of tea. It's not without cliches and tropes, but what story these days doesn't have those? In fact, I'd argue that's part of the point with Alan Wake 2. I'm just going to be real and say that this game is definitely not for everyone. If you're looking for something more akin to Resident Evil or similar titles, Alan Wake 2 is not going to fit in that spot. Alan Wake 2 is a wholly unique experience with a lot more emphasis on the narrative over gameplay. If slow burns and long stretches of just running around and exploring or moving through linear set pieces while things just happen around you sounds boring, especially if on top of that the caseboard I talked about seemed annoying, this game is probably not going to do it for you. However, if you're looking for Alan Wake 2, I think you'll find it here. It's pretty rare that I have such mixed feelings about a game. I like it, but I also have some pretty big issues with it. I think I just genuinely appreciate that Alan Wake 2 is something so different, and with modern games being so copy and paste most of the time, I generally want to praise developers for doing something fresh, even if it's far from perfect. These are just my thoughts. I'm curious what you all think about Alan Wake 2. I've heard people absolutely raving about the game, but I've also heard people on the totally opposite end of the spectrum. At the end of the day, you have to decide for yourself if this game's going to be something you enjoy. I'm just some guy on the internet. Thanks so much for watching. I've been in the writer's room for long enough. Peace.